National Democrats are ramping up criticism of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito after Alito admitted that flags associated with the far right flew from two of his homes. Shortly after the 2020 election, Alito says his wife raised an upside-down American flag outside their Virginia home. The flag is closely associated with Donald Trump's Stop the Steal movement. Then in 2023, Alito flew an Appeal to Heaven flag at a vacation home in New Jersey. The flag has been recently associated with calls for a conservative, biblically centered government. Both flags were flown during the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. The Hill White House correspondent Alex Gangitano joins us to discuss. Alex, Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin has an op-ed out in the New York Times arguing that the Department of Justice can take action here. What's he saying?
That's right. So Jamie Raskin of Maryland is basically saying that the DOJ could force Alito's recusal, as well as a recusal from Justice Clarence Thomas because of his wife's involvement in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election, and that in order for neither of these men to be part of the decision-making in court cases related to January 6th, he's basically saying that the DOJ could petition other justices on the court to require them to recuse themselves, because right now neither of them are voluntarily recusing. So it's another kind of way, but it would take petitioning from the other justices, including the conservative justices on the court.
Yeah, and we also have Democrats asking the court's Chief Justice, John Roberts, to explain how he plans to enforce the court's code of conduct as it pertains to Alito. The rules were adopted just last year. What do they say, and what are Democrats asking Justice Roberts to do?
Yeah, so these rules that were adopted basically in the wake of a scandal about Clarence Thomas's acceptance of numerous gifts and vacations and payments basically defines that the 9 justices have to abide by this code of conduct that gives them like 5 new rules. And one of them, which is notable, includes that families should not influence official conduct or decisions. So, in this situation, Alito here is blaming his wife for the flag hanging incident. So that comes back to Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal is basically asking Justice Roberts to use his powers to enforce this code of conduct and basically pressure Alito and Thomas to recuse themselves from these. He's arguing that Roberts here can convince the 2 justices and compel them to step aside step aside by not assigning opinions to either of them if they fail to voluntarily recuse themselves. So a bit of a threat there too, but basically compelling Roberts to step in here.
Yeah, speaking of the Supreme Court, the court issuing a unanimous ruling in favor of the National Rifle Association in its fight against a former New York regulator. This is a case that produced some unlikely allies. The NRA was represented before the High Court by the ACLU. Alex, what does the ruling mean for this case moving forward?
Yeah, it definitely produced some interesting allies here as a First Amendment case. This ruling allows the NRA to now proceed with this First Amendment case against Maria Vollo, who used to run the New York Department of Financial Services. Basically, in 2017, she began investigating the NRA, and her probe led to her encouraging insurers and banks that she regulated to sever ties with the NRA in the wake of the deadly mass shooting in Parkland, Florida. The NRA then is arguing that her steps were beyond just advocacy and went into an unconstitutional territory. And in this case, the Supreme Court is siding with the National Rifle Association here and saying that you can go ahead and pursue these charges against her. It doesn't mean that they'll win. They could, the case could go into a lower court. But in this case, they're allowed to just move forward with that.
Now, jury deliberations in the Donald Trump hush money trial continue, with jurors posing a series of questions to the judge. One of the questions was about jury instructions. What did they ask?
Yeah, it was interesting. Today they asked for a repeat of basically their instructions here. And according to our reporters in the room, a lot of them were taking notes in particular on definitions of some terms that they asked the jury, or they asked the judge to clarify. And some notable terms here were interference, common sense, reasonable doubt. These terms that jurors, after 8 hours of deliberation, wanted the judge again to define for them as part of their instructions. Again, the jury is considering the charges against former President Trump in a hush money trial, and they also had, on top of the questions about instructions, they had a question about some sections of the testimony that's already been heard in this case.
And jurors also wanted to rehear testimony from two prosecution witnesses, David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, and Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen. What were they interested in there?
Yeah, so they wanted to review these sections from Cohen, who, of course, was one of the most notable witnesses here during the trial, and from Pecker. And some of the Pecker questions were about his testimony in regard to the funding for an assignment involving Playboy model Karen McDougal. Also, his testimony regarding a Trump Tower meeting he had with Trump and Michael Cohen in August of 2015, and regarding an investor meeting that he had with the Trump team. So some interesting points here that the jury found that they wanted to review again.
The administrator of USAID is speaking out about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza as Israeli forces continue their offensive in the southern city of Rafah. What is the administrator saying about the conditions on the ground?
Yeah, so Administrator Samantha Powell gave a pretty stark warning about the conditions in Gaza, saying that they're worse than ever before. Of course, this follows the recent Israeli strike on the southern Gaza city of Rafah that displaced people and killed 45 Palestinians, injuring hundreds of them. And of course, there was backlash internationally about this strike. Eventually, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu acknowledged that it was a tragic mistake and has called for an investigation. Here's something that the White House said that they're waiting for the results of this investigation. But, for somebody inside the administration like Samantha Power to say, things are worse than ever, I think is definitely a dire warning and maybe can point to some pivot inside the White House about how they're feeling about the situation on the ground.
And at the same time, the Biden administration is opposing sanctions against officials at the International Criminal Court. A bipartisan group of lawmakers in Congress proposed sanctions in response to the ICC officials recommending that war crime charges be brought against Israeli leaders over the war in Gaza. Alex, the White House was highly critical of the ICC here, so why is it opposed to this?
Yeah, there's a lot being balanced here from the White House's end. They're shooting down a sanctions proposal, like you mentioned, from bipartisan House negotiators that would basically reprimand the International Criminal Court, the ICC, slapping penalties on officials for recommending war crimes against Israeli leaders. That also included Netanyahu. And the White House said they want to find an alternative with Congress, that they think sanctions are unacceptable and not the answer here, but they want to find something. So this is them, kind of trying to toe a fine line here. They said they reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. We heard from the Secretary of State Antony Blinken appearing to be open to penalizing the ICC through legislation. But they also want to make it clear that they do think Netanyahu here has the right to defend himself in the war against Hamas. So this is, all part of the fine line that they've been walking since the start of the war between supporting Israel, but also condemning violence against civilians and listening to progressives and activists here in the U.S. who think that a ceasefire needs to immediately happen.
And I want to ask you about the presidential race. Politico reported this week that Democrats are in full panic over poll numbers that continue to show former President Trump beating President Biden. Now we're hearing from Democrats trying to quell the meltdown. What is the mood at the White House as it pertains to Biden's reelection chances?
Yeah, so you're right. Democrats that we've talked to are generally warning against a full meltdown over poll numbers, basically saying that there's still plenty of time. Democrats always have anxiety when it goes into elections. If you remember in 2022, we were having the same conversation, and Democrats ended up doing better than expected in the midterm results. And also that they do have, the debates. They think that Biden will really shine. And as time goes on, Biden can out fundraise Trump and whatever else. at the White House, they try to keep the narrative that they don't want to be involved with the elections and they can't weigh in. But, from Biden team generally, we're hearing that polling numbers don't matter this far out, that it's still several months away from Election Day. But one thing that was particularly interesting this week is we heard from First Lady Jill Biden. She went on The View and she said that she thinks things are going to turn in favor of Biden as time goes on. So I think that's pretty consistent with the White House's thinking overall, that the Biden campaign just needs some more time, and especially voters who are unengaged right now, disillusioned by their choices in November, or just not checked in. They think that those people, once they start to get engaged, the polling will improve for the president.
All right, Alex Gangitano, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Popular weight loss drug Wegovy could potentially bankrupt the U.S. healthcare system if prices do not drop. That's according to a new report released by the Office of Senate Health Committee Chair Bernie Sanders. They say Wegovy and other weight loss drugs could lead to Americans spending $1 trillion per year on the drugs unless prices drastically decline. Supplier of Wegovy, Novo Nordisk, says the company is reviewing the report and is cooperating with the investigation. If you have used Ticketmaster to buy tickets for concerts or sporting events, your personal information may be in jeopardy. The notorious hacker group Shiny Hunters is claiming they breached the data of around 560 million Ticketmaster users. The group says they accessed the names, emails, phone numbers, addresses, and credit card details of users in a global cyber attack. Reports indicate the hackers are trying to sell the information online for $500,000. This adds to recent bad news for Ticketmaster. The business, along with parent company Live Nation, is being sued by the Justice Department, accusing the two companies of monopolizing the live entertainment industry. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.